Have you ever helped someone you loved without asking for anything in return? Imagine spending years saving money so your granddaughter could chase her dreams, only to discover that your own son believed that money was his to spend. That is exactly what happened to Gerald Whitfield. Gerald was 68 years old. He had worked for 35 years as a mail carrier in Pittsburgh. Every day, he walked the same streets, delivered the same letters, and greeted the same neighbors. It was not a job that made him rich, but it gave him an honest living. 3 years earlier, Gerald had lost his wife, Nancy, after a difficult battle with cancer. They had been married for 44 years. Losing her changed everything. The house felt quieter. Meals became smaller. Every room reminded him of the life they had built together. Gerald and Nancy had one son named Brian. Brian was married to Megan, and together they had a daughter named Ava. To Gerald, Ava was his greatest joy. When Ava was accepted into a good university, Gerald knew the tuition would be expensive. He remembered how hard money had been when Brian was younger. He never wanted Ava to carry the same burden. So he made a decision. Without telling anyone, Gerald opened a special account. He placed over $90,000 into it using his savings and part of Nancy's life insurance. Every semester, the money went directly to Ava's university. She could focus on her education without worrying about tuition. Gerald never wanted praise. He didn't tell Ava because he didn't want her to feel like she owed him something. He didn't tell Brian or Megan either. He simply said he had helped out a little. For 2 years, everything stayed peaceful. Or so he believed. Then one Thursday afternoon, everything changed. Like many weeks before, Gerald stopped by Brian's house with groceries. He used the side door, carrying 2 heavy bags. Before walking into the kitchen, he paused for just a moment to catch his breath. That's when he heard voices. Brian and Megan were talking. At first, Gerald wasn't trying to listen. But then he heard something that made him freeze. Megan said they had found a bank transfer showing nearly $90,000 sitting in an account they never knew about. Then she laughed. She said Gerald was getting old and probably didn't even remember where all his money was. Brian laughed too. He said his father probably wouldn't notice if some of that money disappeared. Then they started talking about buying a boat. A boat, with money Gerald had carefully saved for Ava's education. Gerald stood there in complete silence. The grocery bags suddenly felt much heavier. His own son believed he was too old to understand his finances. His daughter-in-law talked about getting power of attorney so they could help manage his money. But to Gerald, it sounded like they had already decided how they wanted to spend it. He could have walked into the kitchen. He could have shouted. He could have demanded answers. Instead, he quietly placed the grocery bags on the floor. He turned around. He walked back outside without making a sound. He sat inside his truck for a long time. Every sentence they had spoken echoed in his mind. The people he trusted most had been planning a future with money that was never theirs. On the drive home, Gerald didn't feel angry. He felt disappointed. That evening, he sat alone at his kitchen table with a legal pad. He wrote down everything he knew. The money belonged to him. It was meant for Ava. Brian believed Gerald wouldn't notice if it disappeared. Megan wanted more control over his finances. As Gerald looked at the page, one thought became clear. If they believed he wasn't paying attention, maybe it was time to prove them wrong. The next morning, Gerald woke up earlier than usual. He made himself a cup of coffee and sat at the same kitchen table where he and Nancy had spent so many mornings together. The house was quiet, but his mind wasn't. He kept thinking about what he had heard. The laughter. The boat. The words, "He's too old to notice." Those words hurt more than anything else. But Gerald wasn't going to make a decision based on anger. After delivering mail for 35 years, he had learned one important lesson. Never act before you know exactly what you're doing. So instead of calling Brian, Gerald picked up his phone and called someone else. He called his granddaughter Ava. When Ava answered, she sounded surprised. "Hi, Grandpa. Everything okay?" Gerald smiled. "I just wanted to ask you something." They talked for a few minutes about school, her classes, and how she was settling into university life. Then Gerald took a deep breath. "Ava," he said gently, "there's something I've never told you." There was a short silence. "For the last 2 years I've been paying your tuition." Ava didn't say anything. For several seconds, Gerald thought the call had dropped. Finally, she whispered, "You what?" Gerald explained everything. He told her about the account. He told her why he had kept it a secret. He never wanted her to feel guilty or thankful every semester. He simply wanted her to study without worrying about money. Ava became emotional. "Grandpa, I had no idea. My parents never told me." Gerald nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I know." Then he asked her an important question. "Do you have your own bank account? One that only you can access?" Ava answered immediately. Yes. She had opened a student account during her first year at college. Nobody else could use it. "Good," Gerald replied. "I need you to send me the account information. But please, don't tell anyone about this conversation." Ava agreed without asking more questions. The following morning, Gerald met with his financial advisor, Dennis. Dennis had managed Gerald and Nancy's finances for almost 15 years. Gerald trusted him completely. Inside the office, Gerald calmly explained everything he had overheard. He talked about Brian. He talked about Megan. He talked about the conversation about the boat. Dennis listened carefully without interrupting. When Gerald finished, Dennis leaned forward. "The solution is simple," he said. "We'll close the current account. We'll move every dollar into a brand new account that belongs only to Ava. No one else will have access." Gerald smiled for the first time in days. "Let's do it." Over the next few days, they completed all the paperwork. The original tuition account was closed. After 2 years of careful investing, the balance had grown to more than $91,000. Every penny was transferred into Ava's new account. Dennis also worked directly with the university. Future tuition payments would now come from Ava's account instead of Gerald's. Everything was secure. Everything was legal. Most importantly, no one except Ava could touch the money. Gerald didn't do this to punish Brian. At least, not entirely. He still loved his son. But he had realized something important. The money had always been meant for Ava's future. Somehow, Brian and Megan had started thinking of it as their opportunity. That had to end. Once trust is broken, protecting what matters becomes even more important. For the next 3 weeks, Gerald acted exactly the same as always. Every Thursday, he visited with groceries. He asked Brian about work. He smiled politely. When Megan mentioned the marina and boats again, Gerald simply nodded and said they sounded nice. Neither Brian nor Megan had any idea. The account they believed existed was already gone. Then, one Tuesday morning, everything began to fall apart. Brian contacted the bank. Later, Gerald learned that Brian had tried to ask about the tuition account, but the bank refused to give him any information. He wasn't listed as the owner. He wasn't an authorized user. He had no access at all. That afternoon, Gerald's phone rang. It was Brian. He tried to sound relaxed. "Dad, I think there's been some kind of mistake. The bank says the tuition account isn't there anymore." "Did something happen?" Gerald answered calmly. "No mistake. I closed it." There was complete silence. Then Gerald continued. "I moved every dollar into Ava's account. She's the only person who can access it now." Another long silence. Finally, Brian spoke. "But why?" Gerald had waited weeks for this conversation. Now he was ready. "I heard everything you and Megan said that day. I heard you laugh. I heard you talk about using my money. And I heard you say I was too old to notice." The line went completely quiet. Brian knew exactly what his father was talking about. For the first time, there was nothing left to hide. For several long seconds, neither Gerald nor Brian said a word. The silence felt heavier than any argument. Finally, Brian cleared his throat. "Dad, you misunderstood. We were only talking. It wasn't serious." Gerald closed his eyes for a moment. He had expected that answer. Slowly, he replied, "Brian, I've spent my whole life listening carefully before speaking. I know exactly what I heard. You laughed. You talked about moving my money. You believed I wouldn't notice. And that hurt more than you can imagine." Brian tried again. "I'm sorry. We weren't actually going to do it. It was just conversation." Gerald answered calmly, "Maybe. But when people think no one is listening, that's usually when they say what they really believe." Another silence followed. This one was even longer. Finally, Brian asked if they could meet in person. Gerald didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He simply answered, "I'll think about it." 2 days later, Gerald received another phone call. This time it was Megan. Unlike Brian, she sounded frustrated. "Gerald," she began, "you've taken everything out of context. We were joking. Married couples say silly things all the time. You can't seriously believe we wanted your money." Gerald listened without interrupting. When she finished, he spoke quietly. "A joke is only funny when everyone laughs." "I wasn't laughing. I heard you say I was too old to understand my own finances. I heard you discuss buying a boat with money that wasn't yours. Whether you called it a joke or not, it showed me exactly how you saw me. And because of that, the money now belongs completely to Ava. That decision is final." There was nothing more to say. The call ended only a few moments later. Later that week, Ava called her grandfather. Unlike her parents, she wasn't trying to defend anyone. She simply wanted to thank him. "Grandpa," she said softly, "I still can't believe you've been helping me all this time. I don't even know how to thank you." Gerald smiled. "You already have. You're working hard. You're building your future. That's all I ever wanted." Ava became emotional. "I promise I'll make you proud." Gerald laughed gently. "You already do." Then he gave her one final piece of advice. "The money is yours. Use it wisely. Finish school. Build the life your grandmother always dreamed you would have." Ava promised she would. About 2 weeks later, Brian came to visit Gerald alone. They sat together at the old kitchen table where Gerald and Nancy had shared countless meals over the years. Neither of them spoke right away. Finally, Gerald broke the silence. "Brian, I love you. Nothing will ever change that. You're my son. But loving someone doesn't mean giving them control over everything you've worked your whole life to build." Brian stared at the table. After a long pause, he admitted something. Money had been tight. Much tighter than he had ever told his father. The conversation about the boat had started as a dream. Then it slowly became something they talked about more often. Neither he nor Megan ever expected Gerald to hear it. Brian looked up. "I'm ashamed. I should never have spoken about you that way. I was wrong." Gerald nodded. "I understand financial pressure. I've lived through it myself. But hard times don't give us permission to forget respect. The money was always for Ava. It was never meant for anyone else. And that's exactly where it will stay." Brian apologized again. This time it sounded different. There were no excuses. No explanations. Just regret. Gerald accepted the apology. But forgiveness didn't erase what had happened. Trust takes years to build. Sometimes only a few careless words are enough to break it. Over the following months, things slowly improved. Brian visited more often. Their conversations became honest again. Megan remained distant, and Gerald accepted that. Not every relationship returns to the way it once was. Sometimes peace means accepting that people have changed. Meanwhile, Ava called her grandfather every week. She talked about her classes, her professors, her part-time job at the campus library. For the first time, their conversations had nothing to do with money. They were simply a grandfather and granddaughter enjoying each other's company. That meant more to Gerald than anything else. Every afternoon, sunlight still reached the picture of Nancy sitting on the mantel above the fireplace. Sometimes Gerald would smile at her photograph. He imagined telling her everything that had happened. He knew she would have agreed with his decision. Helping